In this video, we will cover the Doctrine Installation Lab solution for configuring the application for Doctrine. Borrowing from one of the many examples available, we create a file called doctrine_autoloader.php. First of all, we include an instance of the Composer autoloader. We then add references to the various Doctrine namespaces, which include annotations, cache, collections, and so forth. We point them to the appropriate directory under vendor. We then add 4 additional namespaces, which represent the namespaces for the application itself: model, view, entity, and repository. To tie our new autoloader into the application, we have to go to the public folder and look for index.php. Looking in this file, you'll notice that there's a very primitive autoloading implementation, which is a global function _autoload. This is a magic function which is built into PHP itself. You'll notice in this example, all this autoloader does is to take the class name, which includes the namespace name, convert the backslashes into directory separators, add a .php at the end, make sure the file exists, and if so, includes the file. This functionality works perfectly well. However, once you start to incorporate third-party libraries, such as Doctrine, this functionality is not sufficient. What we need to do is to comment out this code and to replace it with a requirement for our own Doctrine autoloader program just created. We can then move to the Suites Complete website, again using localhost, and verify that the functionality is not broken. We can confirm this by commenting out our new autoloader, going back to the website, clicking one of the buttons, and you'll notice it now says not found. Obviously, make sure that you remove the comments so that the application will function normally. In order to create a base class which gives us access to the entity manager, we need to make some modifications to the existing init class, which is under model. As you will recall, this is where our database parameters are located. However, they're in the form of predefined constants. We've created a property called params, and in the constructor, we populate it with the various values, including the path to the entities and the parameters necessary to access the MySQL database. We are then in a position to create a base class, which we will also put in the model folder called base. In this class, we reference Doctrine ORM tool setup, entity manager, annotation driver, and the common annotation reader and registry. We take as an argument the params, which come from the init class. We then build an instance of the annotation driver, supplying the entity directories as an argument. We register the loader. We create the configuration. We then apply the driver to the configuration using set metadata driver IMPL, which stands for implementation. We then use the static method create from the entity manager, supplying the database parameters as an argument, as well as the configuration. We then create a series of getters and setters that apply to the various properties of interest. Finally, we're able to create the cli-config.php file. This is essential if we wish to use the command line tool. First of all, we include the file for Doctrine autoloading. We then use the base, init, and console runner classes. We create a new init object. We then get the params from the init object and supply that as an argument to the base class. We then use the base class to obtain the entity manager instance, which is supplied to the create helper set method of the console runner. Moving to the command line, the big test is to run vendor bin doctrine. If we have successfully configured our connection to the database, you will see this screen. If that's not the case, you will receive an error message instead. If you do receive an error message, backtrack through the various files and make sure that you've got everything configured correctly. So here's our CLI config, our base class, which creates an entity manager instance. We have an init class, which provides the parameters for connecting to the database. And we have our Doctrine autoloading as well.